every offseason there are moves that are made that shock everyone and change the outlook of the league and how teams look at the offseason and if they're going to make moves that make them a winner or a loser of the offseason. So let's take a look at the winners and losers of the NFC North. So the Chicago Bears came into the offseason needing offensive line, linebacker, defensive back, D-line, tight end depth, wide receiver, and edge. So did they sign that? Did they draft that? Let's take a look. The Bears brought in some key pieces in Deontay Foreman, traded for DJ Moore, Robert Tonyan. They signed Nate Davis, brought in Rasheem Green, DeMarcus Walker, Tremaine Edmonds, and TJ Edwards to name a few pieces. They also brought in Andrew Billings, who's probably going to be really good in the run game. Those are some good names that the Bears brought in to really help the defense, and honestly, some of the few running backs that they brought in are pretty good. They also signed PJ Walker to be a backup for Justin Fields. That's going to be honestly a better backup than they had last year in Nathan Peterman or Trevor Siemian, which they still brought back Nathan Peterman, who knows the offense. But I think the PJ Walker signing is better than they had last year at backup because of the fact that he is a mobile quarterback and he did play with DJ Moore. So there is that connection there. The Bears did lose a few players though, as they lost Trevon Wesco, Armand Watts, Nicholas Morrow, Riley Reif, David Montgomery, Matthew Adams. A lot of those guys are depth pieces except for David Montgomery, who was a huge piece. Really, I think if they didn't really pay him, they lost him for $18 million over 3 years, as he's a guy that has a high motor who just fights for a lot of yards and is just someone that's going to continue to fight and just grow as a player over his time. And I think Detroit is going to be really good. Now, the draft is where the Bears really, I think, changed how this team is going to be looked at, because they had the 10th overall selection they had the 9th overall selection. They traded down to the 10th pick. At number 9, Jalen Carter fell. Now, there was a lot of character issues with him, and the Bears were a team that took him off the draft board, and you could tell, because they traded down one spot with the Eagles and got a 4th rounder next year for him. So they selected Darnell Wright, number 10 overall. And you can just tell that pick is probably the right pick because he's a right tackle, and when he's on, he is on. He stopped Will Anderson and B.J. Ojulari, two really good pass rushers in this year's draft class. So he's one of the best pass blocking offensive tackles in this year's draft. He also tested really well at the combine. He's one of the best athletes at the tackle position this year. I really wanted Paris Johnson of the Bears, but he obviously got taken 6th overall to the Cardinals, so there's that. They got Jervin Dexter, Tyreek Stevenson, Zach Pickens, Roshan Johnson, and Tyler Scott. Those picks, I think, are great values for the rounds that they got him in. And the selections that they did, I think those players could be really good and have impact eventually in their careers, whether they be day one impacts or late in the season or in the middle of the season or in a few years. I think also Noah Sewell, I think, is also going to be really good eventually. He's not going to be thrown into the fire right away. He's going to be a rotational linebacker. I think that's going to be good for the Bears. And I think, honestly, that this draft class is going to be really good for them down the road and in the future. So I think, honestly, the Bears had a really good draft. So if I had to grade this offseason from trading the number 1 overall pick for draft picks this year and next year and in 2025, I think the offseason would get A, and then the draft class would get a B+, just for a few of the picks maybe that might not pan out or just a few question marks on them. That might affect some of the starts of a few of the players' careers that the Bears did draft. So let's transition into the Detroit Lions now. The Detroit Lions came into the offseason looking to improve and continuing to get better and stronger with the plan of winning the NFC North next year because of the problems with cap space that some of the teams in the NFC North they are facing. So what were the needs that the Lions have faced? So they needed a quarterback for the future. They needed a tight end, wide receiver, linebacker, and cornerback depth. So what did the Lions sign, and did they retain anything that was really important? Well, the Lions brought in David Montgomery. They re-signed Craig Reynolds, a good depth running back. They brought in Marvin Jones, Graham Glasnow. They re-signed Alex Anzalone. He's okay linebacker. They brought in Jalen Reeves-Maybin. He's all right, in my opinion. Now this is really where it gets big, because the quarterback depth that they just signed here in Emmanuel Moseley, Cameron Sutton, C.J. Gardner-Johnson, is where these things are huge, because these are great corners and great defensive backs that I think are going to really help this team get better and really help the passing game and help this young pass rush get to the quarterback and improve the young, well, just make this team that's young and good even better, because they're going to have time to get to the quarterback because they're not letting the wide receivers get open in 2 seconds or whatnot, because they have better corners and proven corners too at that fact. So did they lose any key players? Well, they really lost Amari Uruwariye, Jamal Williams, DJ Chark, and Deshaun Elliott. So they kind of balanced everything out. Jamal Williams was lost, but they brought in David Montgomery. So yeah, kind of seemed like Jamal Williams was on his way out because maybe he wanted too much money. Maybe they didn't want to pay him as much. So yeah, they also did lose DeAndre Swift because, well, let's take a look at what they drafted. So Lions drafted Jahmyr Gibbs, Jack Campbell, Sam Laporta, Brian Branch, Hendon Hooker, Broderick Martin, Colby Sorsdale, and Antonio Green. Obviously, Jahmyr Gibbs, Jack Campbell, Sam Laporta, Brian Branch, and Hooker, probably players that are going to have an impact for the Lions in the future. And I think the top 4 picks are going to have players that are going to be impact players from day one. I think Campbell, Branch, and Gibbs are going to be players that are going to start right away and do phenomenal things. And I think Laporta is going to take a little bit of time to develop, as most tight ends do coming into the league, because they have to get used to the NFL's physicality. Even though Sam Laporta played in the Big Ten, where they're a little bit more physical than some conferences, even though I'm not saying that the SEC isn't or any other conference, but just how everything goes. I think just honestly how this draft class went for the Lions, I think Campbell and Laporta are going to be really good players from the University of Iowa that they got are going to be pretty good. I think they'll have long careers, and I think Jahmyr Gibbs and Brian Branch from the University of Alabama, I think they're both going to be special players. I think Gibbs could be what I've been seeing from a lot of people, and I think from what reports are saying, they're going to use him as a Deebo Samuel type of player, and I think if they do that, that's going to be scary, because if he can do that, and I think Jahmyr Gibbs has the potential to do that, and I think Brian Branch, you can plug and play him anywhere, and that could be scary. And Hendon Hooker, he's a question mark, man. He's 25. Who knows if he'll be there long enough? I don't think he will. If they're having him there as a backup, not a right choice, man. He's 25. By the time his 5th-year option is there, he's 30. So you wasted 5 years by then, so not a bright choice. So I will give the Lions off-season a as well, and their draft about a B- in my personal opinion. So let's go take a look at the Packers. The Packers came into the offseason with either the agenda of trading Aaron Rodgers or building around Aaron Rodgers even more. So what did they do? Well, they traded him. So did they get anything in return for him? Well, they got a 1st-round pick this year, a few picks in the later rounds, and a 2nd-round compensation pick next year that could turn into a 1st round next year if he plays 65% of the snaps, which he most likely will. So yeah, that'll probably be 2 1st-round picks for Aaron Rodgers. So did they get any assets in return for Jordan Love? Well, not really, sort of. In the draft, they did not really in free agency. So what do the Packers need this offseason, and did they address it? They did DB, wide receiver, D-line, edge, tight end, and O-line. What do they bring back from any in-house or any additions? They didn't bring in anything. They only re-signed 3 players. Really, the one big one was Keyshawn Nixon. They lost Alan Lazard, Robert Tonyan, Dean Lowry, and Jerron Reed. Those were really the big ones, and Chris Barnes. Some really big losses at least. And then, well, the draft is really where everything was a bit of a mess and then not at the same time. I think the top 4-ish to 5-ish picks, I think, is where the Packers really made a lot of the biggest hits. I think Lucas Van Ness is going to fix the edge need, and then Luke Musgrave, Tucker Kraft in the 3rd round, Luke Musgrave in the 2nd are going to fix that tight end need. Jaden Reed is a speedster who's going to hopefully fix the wide receiver need, but not, who knows? It's a 2nd-round wide receiver. They normally pan out well, but it's compared to what they could have gotten at that 13th pick. I would rather take a Zay Flowers over him, obviously, and a Lucas Van Ness. So we'll see. I think a Grant Dubose is going to be someone for in a 7th round with a great value. Sean Clifford, a great pick, but he's going to be a backup. So this team confuses me. The front office confuses me. I don't know what to do with this team. I think just with what they got and the positional value and stuff like that, I think it's good. But they were strapped for cash. So they obviously couldn't do much this offseason because of how late they traded Aaron Rodgers and everything like that. So since how late they traded Aaron Rodgers, I give that offseason free agency part a D. And for the draft, I give them a C+, because just what they should have done and what they did it's just weird, man. Like, honestly, the Packers, they didn't do enough, in my opinion, to really think that they're going to be better with Jordan Love than they were with Aaron Rodgers. I think they're going to be a little bit worse. They might be last place because the Bears did get better, but who knows? Maybe the Vikings will be a little bit worse. So that's a good starter. So let's transition into the Vikings now. So the Minnesota Vikings offseason plan was a little bit different than what they normally did. Last year, they spent a lot of money, brought in some big names like Zadarius Smith and stuff to really bolster that defense and fix the issues they had. It didn't really work. The defense was not a little bit bad. It was really bad, and it couldn't keep him in games and cost him a lot of points and honestly lost him a lot of games. And so they came into the offseason needing to fix that. And did they? Sort of. They brought in Marcus Davenport, who honestly is good. He has a 17.8% pass rush win rate over his career, which is top 20% for edge rushers since 2018. He has an 82.1% run defense grade from PFF. So he's no pushover in that in the run defense, so he's not bad. Then you have Byron Murphy. He's good. He's going to replace Patrick Peterson perfectly fine. He's young too, so he's no slouch either. So it's definitely going to be good for the Vikings to get a young corner to come in and actually replace a veteran defensive back room that's there. So I think that the free signings they had are good, but it's just, is it going to be enough to really fix that defense? They re-signed some pieces. They brought in Josh Oliver to be a backup to TJ Hawkinson. So maybe some of these pieces are there. They lost some names. Patrick Peterson, obviously, if they kept him, I would be much more stronger with this defense. They lost Duke Shelley or Kendricks, Dalvin Tomlinson, same thing. They kept him, I would be much more stronger with this defense. Now with the draft, they drafted Jordan Addison. They brought in Mekhi Blackman, Jay Ward, and all these guys. Now, Jay Ward, Mekhi Blackman are some cornerbacks and safeties that I think could develop maybe and actually be some key pieces. Jaquan Roy, maybe he could be a defensive nose tackle. And then Dwayne McBride, I think, could probably actually be solid for the Vikings. And honestly, he could be, but it just all depends. It takes time for these picks to develop, and I think Jordan Addison is probably going to be a day one impact for them. But the Vikings offseason is weird, and I don't know if it's going to be enough for it to impact them and continue for them to get better. And I think the Lions might have passed them just because of what the Lions did. So honestly, the offseason grade, a B-. The draft, I'm going to give them a B just because the players that they could have can develop and stuff. So just from my personal opinion, I think the Vikings got a little bit worse, and I think the winners of the NFC North offseason has been the Bears and Lions. I think the middle is the Vikings, and I think the losers, honestly, just because of how late they traded Rodgers, is the Packers. So I thank you all for watching. Please click that like button, make sure it turns blue, subscribe, click the notification bell, and I thank you all for watching. Have a good day, everyone.